The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. Hello, everyone. So today is one of those days that it just stands out. And it's a first because of the huge topic that we're going to be talking about, Montessori materials. Like, what are they? Why are they important? What do they mean for children? And more. And the second reason that today stands out is my guest, Ginni Sackett. For those of you who don't know her, let me give you some quick background. She is the director of pedagogy with the Association Montessori Internationale. And in layman's terms, that means she is the head of all education at AMI. And that's the organization literally founded by Maria Montessori herself. Now, I'd say that's seemingly as big as you get in Montessori to match our kind of big topic. But I'm not actually having Ginni on because of, some impressive title. I just think she really knows what she's talking about with Montessori, like really knows. And I wanted you all out there to gain from her as I have over the years. So Ginni herself has a lot of real life experience under her belt. She was brought up during the 1950s out in Philadelphia, PA, in a struggling working class family and far from Montessori, as she had a very strict Catholic school education. And she puts education in quotes there. I think Ginni is a bit of a rebel, I would say. Now, college-wise, she graduated from Seton Hall University with a degree in history and philosophy, later got her master's in Asian studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, while also spending some time in Taipei, Taiwan. Now, back in Hawaii in 1975, she had her first child, and that was while defending her school thesis on the position of women in traditional China. Again, I think Ginni is somewhat of a radical, and I say that in a good way. In all, she has lived and experienced many places, but eventually she ended up calling Oregon her home, and that is where her Montessori journey actually began. So she was a mother there in Salem, Oregon, and she had enrolled her 4-year-old son by accident, as she puts it, in a local Montessori school. And here I want to briefly share Ginni's own words, as I think it's good context into her personality as well as into her beginnings as an educator. So, quote, "I knew nothing about Montessori, paid attention to less. I was a terrible Montessori parent, didn't attend parent nights, had to be coerced into parent-teacher conferences. They threatened to disenroll my son if I didn't sign up. But I saw an already wonderful child become even more wonderful, and I finally asked, 'What is this?'" End of quote. And then from then on, she was hooked. So here's her quick resume since that point. So in the early 80s, she earned her Montessori teaching diploma, and that's AMI for 3 to 6-year-olds. Then she spent 12 years as a teacher or guide in the classroom for that age group. In the early 2000s, she became an AMI trainer, and that is a teacher of teachers. And she headed the Montessori training program in Portland, Oregon. And that's called Montessori Northwest. And that was until 2017, when shortly after she became what she is today. And again, that's the director of pedagogy of AMI, and that's out in Amsterdam. Now, meanwhile, for the past nearly half century, so during some of the same time, Ginni has also been a parent. That's eventually with a fantastic partner, as she says it, and that's helping to raise 5 children in total. She's got 4 boys and 1 girl, and they're all now in their 40s. And Ginni says she loves all of them, and they are amazing human beings, in her words. She is also a grandparent with 4 grandchildren, ages 3 to 15, and each one a beneficiary of Montessori parenting and education. She is happy to share. That, in a nutshell, is Ginni. And just to throw in a random extra tidbit about her, she is also a 3rd degree black belt. So, I'd say that basically means she could probably kick most of our asses, But in all seriousness, Ginni here has lived a life. I mean, she has a tremendous amount of wisdom to share, and I would say from a very independent-minded perspective. Like, her voice is really her own, as I hope you'll come to hear. Now, personally, Ginni has impressed me over the years, and I am really excited to have her on the show, and especially to tackle one of the most foundational and challenging topics that can be covered in Montessori. Again, that's the materials. Now, as a quick note, this isn't going to be a kind of YouTube, 10 Montessori materials you can make it from IKEA type thing. Like, we're going to go deep here. Now, not that making your own materials isn't cool. Like, I'd say do what you can do. There are all sorts of creative ways to achieve Montessori at home and in school. So that's not the point. But I just wanted to get you ready for what's coming. I'm having Ginni on to really dig into the topic of Montessori materials, get to some of the why behind it all. So with all that as a little intro, let's hop in. All right. Well, I am excited to start today off because we have with us Ginni Sackett. Thank you so much for being with us, Ginni.
I'm happy to be here.
All right. So before we jump into kind of, let's say, the meat of Montessori materials, can you just give me an experience with, the materials that you had maybe as a child working with one that just really changed things for you, or, that in the moment there was just a big insight that you gained about the materials?
Oh, gosh, there's so many, but I'm just thinking of a little boy that I worked with once who was not an English speaker at all. He was a Cantonese speaker, and he arrived shortly but around his 4th birthday. And so really our big focus was helping him learn English, which was a fabulous way to re-examine our whole spoken language work. But in the meantime, because we don't need language for so much of our work with the materials when we present them to children, he was getting all kinds of lessons and activities. And it was an interesting contrast where we couldn't communicate by language, but we could communicate through the materials. And one day he was working with the Pink Tower. And of course, we always want to see children exploring with those materials. They're not just one way that you do the Pink Tower. And he was a very active explorer with all of the materials. But I noticed he was building it and then taking it apart and building it again and taking it apart and building it again. And I was able to really just observe from the sidelines as he was doing this. And I was like, well, I wonder what's going on there. And then I noticed that every time he took it apart and he built it in a slightly different order. It still stood, but, a slightly different order. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And then I noticed he was kneeling. And every time he would finish building it, he would lean in. And I noticed he apparently had seen that the height of the tower was the same as the height from the floor to his chin when he was kneeling up. And he would just lean in, and it was like he was proving it. And then he would take it apart, build it in a different order. And so what he was proving to himself is no matter what order the blocks were in, the ultimate height was the same. And I was just blown away.
Wow.
This is something that was never in my training or in my album. This is not supposed to be, it's not on some list that says children will discover. And there he was proving to me how exciting and interactive the materials were just between that child and that material at that moment. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about where these materials came from and how they were developed. But just like that, a lot of the materials themselves, right, were through experiences with children, seeing what they do with them and so forth, right?
Exactly. This was not some adult's idea. I think children should have this as a lesson or as a tool for learning. It was much more what you just said. It was like, let's try this and see what happens. The Pink Tower was originally used in Leipzig, Germany in the 1870s. It was part of an early IQ test.
Wow.
I don't know who it was for as an IQ test, but Montessori was attracted to it. And so when she began working with the children actually in Rome in the asylum, she just said, well, let's see what children do with this. Children like blocks, So that was the process of developing the materials.
It is one of the things I found about Maria Montessori is just that her willingness to take things from whatever field or area or country or person that she saw that might work and just experiment with it with children. Just this openness to experimentation, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of her as a great collaborator. You know, she's always looking for ideas. She's always was always seemed to be bringing people in to work with her. And of course, the whole history was, it couldn't just be what happened in her work with a particular group of children. Immediately when she began training people in what she was learning, they would go off to other parts of the world even. Her first international course, there were students from New Zealand, from Australia, from Japan, from the United States, from Argentina, I think. And then they would learn from her, and then they would go back and start applying what they had learned, and very scientific, get the same results. Different cultures, different, all the different socioeconomic and religious and all the things that are different in culture, and they would get the same results. That's a pretty reliable starting point.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned the kind of scientific aspect and so forth. I find that sometimes we can get ourselves in bubbles and not reach out to other people, not see what else is going on. I know when I first started in education, like I literally thought what we were doing with these older children, it was like, 7th and 8th graders. And it wasn't Montessori. I thought, oh, we're doing the best stuff in the world. And I hadn't even really visited other schools yet. It was just, this kind of, it's an arrogance thinking you know everything and you don't, where Maria Montessori just seemed to have that scientific mindset that, no, I need to experiment. I need to see other things.
That is very, very true. But I'm going to do a little bit of a counter to that.
Go for it.
Counter, but once anything, when you approach something from that scientific point of view, once you've really validated a point, there does come to a point where we don't need to prove this anymore. The proof is in the actual application, and in some respects, as she was going through this process, a lot of it was eliminating activities or objects that didn't serve the purpose or that the children rejected.
What's that quote of yours, by the way, Jen, that about perfection is eliminating? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. Well, something is perfect when there's nothing more to add to it.
Yeah, there's nothing more to add or take away. That could be taken away, I think it is. Yeah.
That is not my quote. It's from someone else, and I don't remember exactly. Oh, I think it's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry.
Look at that. Nice.
Who wrote The Little Prince. And he said that perfection, there is nothing left to take away.
Yeah. There you go. So yeah, I'm with you. I was kind of comparing myself as like, early 20s thinking I know everything versus Montessori that kind of tested all of these things. You saw it work with children all over the world. So I am with you. I think, and it's actually an interesting side note that I think a lot of people think, oh, we need to prove this scientifically when literally it's been proven with children all over the world. So I'm with you. I think that is science. Like that shows that it's right. You don't have to go on proving it, ad infinity or something. So
right. But then you can also think of Eduardo Cuevas, the 3 to 6 AMI trainer. And he says that every time we open a new prepared environment, a new classroom, we are recreating Montessori's experiment. So you don't have to ask anyone else to prove it. If you understand it well enough, you create it yourself.
Yeah, and I think what you just said there is creating it yourself. I think that idea that it might be proven, but if you haven't done it with the children yourself, there might be an issue. So you need to do it, right?
Exactly. And going back to Benjamin's story, I love the pig tower. I felt like I understood it, but to see it proven to me, what it meant, what it could mean to a child, that is what you get to experience every day as a Montessori guide.
Yeah, it's powerful. So I'm, now that we're kind of going through different angles of this, just coming back to the basics, like what do you see? And I know this might be a challenging question, but what are Montessori materials? Like if we can abstract away from kind of like maybe a Benjamin situation or the pink tower, like what's their purpose? How are they different from say like a random toy that children might play with, or, like math worksheets in conventional or traditional school? Like what are they?
Well,
I know it's a lot.
So many different ways. I think the first thing is, because we were talking about education. So I think the first point to really embrace is that Montessori materials are about learning, not about teaching. So they are designed so that the child can learn, which is very different than so that a teacher can teach something. And because it's for the child to do the learning, the child is the active person in this relationship. And the teacher is actually quite on the sidelines. The teacher just connects the child to the experience, and through the experience, the child can learn. And once you start thinking of it that way, you have to realize, how does anybody learn anything? Well, first of all, they have to be interested. So how do we know that children will be interested in these particular materials? Well, that was part of the experiment we were just talking about in Montessori's scientific journey of what really grabs the interest of children at a certain stage of development, a certain age, and eliminating the things that they weren't interested in and building on the things they were interested in. And that way allows the child to be in charge. The child is directing the activity. What we do is give them just enough to connect them to it so that they know, okay, these blocks are not for throwing across the room, for example. These blocks are, this is how we hold them, this is how we handle them. But now that you know that, I show you one thing you can do with them, I get out of the way. And I think in order for it to be that kind of a learning experience, we have to be talking about, first of all, something that can be touched, something that can be handled, something that the senses are involved and the motor development are involved, which is very different than learning something on an intellectual level, just by using your intellect. Sensory motor, there also has to be often some kind of preparation to be interested in something. I'm not interested in something right now, but if you give me some other kinds of experiences and I say, oh, I want more of that, then you can feel that interest. And so Montessori materials often depend on this idea of indirect preparation by understanding child development at this stage and knowing that this child might not be interested right now, but this is on that path of development. They are going to be interested in something in particular. And so I'm going to help prepare it. And actually what happens is that materials prepare children for later materials, for later experiences.
Yeah. Ginni, can I ask you on that? Because I know I get this a lot from parents, and just over the years, some parents, they're a little bit more aggressive. They want, my child should be doing this, that type of thing. So can you talk a little bit about that progression that you just mentioned and why, it might not be good for a child to do this, quote, higher level material before doing one that came before it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have to tell you, I was that parent.
Nice. The go-getter.
I was that parent who knew just enough. Oh, actually, I was a parent of a 3-year-old while I was taking my AMI training. And I'm like, why hasn't she had this yet?
Yes, right.
So I know I totally relate to that. And I would like to help calm people the way that I was helped to be calm
Nice.
About this. I have an example. There's a material that's usually for 4 and 5-year-olds. It's in the math area. It's for multiplication. Okay, multiplication is a pretty sophisticated concept. Doesn't just come out of the blue. But it's a beautiful material. It's all different lengths and colors of beads. It's called the multiplication bead bars, and they go from 1 to 10. Each number is a different color. They're slightly, they increase in length, and children use them to experience multiplication. If you have 4 bars of 5 and you count how much it is, you'll know the total of 4 times 5. Okay, great. That's what it's for. But they're beautiful. And I would have children who were very exploratory, new children in particular, little 3-year-olds, and they would go around opening boxes and, trying to touch everything and explore everything. And children were really fascinated by these beautiful beads. But I'm thinking, that child's not fascinated in those beads because she wants to know about multiplication. Mm-hmm. She's interested in the beauty and the shininess and the lengths and the differences and the things that are the same. So what I did is I just got a collection of those beads, and I put them into a bowl and set up a little lesson where the child could sort them.
And
suddenly, she's not interested in the multiplication. So she's really kind of messing with the material. But by giving her own way to interact with those bead bars, she is, and she immediately, children love to sort. We see that around age 2. And so, the red ones go together. All I had to do was just sort of say, look, those are the same, well, those are the same, and leave her. And she would, find all the different ones that are the same, just put them in little clusters together. Now, you would say, what does that have to do with the multiplication? Well, what it's doing is her senses are perceiving that the colors, the length of each bead bar, and then that there are, there are individual beads that create that length. And her mind is being prepared for this idea that this could be quantity.
Yeah.
A quantity that is materialized as numbers of beads on a bar. And so, of course, after that one little girl, every new child that I received, was introduced to sorting the bead bars. And it was like that piece, when a child would come to those bars in the math area, their mind was already prepared for the sensorial information of how they were different, which was length.
Yeah. And, two things jump out with what you're saying. One is just the importance, even in Montessori, we've got this wonderful system, but of a teacher or a guide or a human being who can adapt based on a child's needs in front of them with the materials that you did.
Yeah.
I just find that wonderful because, you could have somebody, and I don't think this is quote Montessori, but they just say, well, no, children can't work with those. They don't have it. And then they don't adapt based on the child's desire to play with those beautiful beads, as you noted. So
yeah.
I think that's huge.
Yeah, that is so true, Jesse. The worst thing is that when we get too rigid, Montessorians can also get rigid and say, well, they're not ready for that. Yeah. Or that's not the right age. And neither one of those is a fixed point. It has to be this child's interest. And if they're not interested, and I would like them to be, what can I do to backtrack, or to create that interest and make that.
And I raised that based on what you said, because there's this quote rigidity to the materials, but the reality is it's what you do with those materials. And as you just noted, I mean, that's just such a great adaptation of what to do with them. So and then the fact that there's a reason why these things are beautiful, right? So can you speak a little bit why these materials are so appealing to children? Like what was the purpose in that and so forth?
Well, I think, first of all, there's just respect. When there's an attitude of respect that's conveyed, that's communicated, when we take the time to have beautiful things, or, when we set the table for dinner, or when we have a friend coming over or we're having company, there's just little things that we would do. If you're going to have company to stay overnight, you want to make sure they have clean towels, and, you want things to be appealing and to be pleasant, because that's a messaging that you're important. And I feel that particularly for our children in the past, I don't know, whenever plastic got around, like this idea that, we can't give them something breakable, or we can't give them something really beautiful, or that they don't care. Yeah. And what Montessori discovered was that they care very much. They really respond to beauty, the aesthetics. Obviously, not the same aesthetics for everybody, but when you give them there's that messaging, you're important, it's valuable, you mean something, and we're going to give you something beautiful. And then the other piece is, we trust you. We think if we can help you, you will be careful with this. And yes, it's breakable. And if you break it, you know what? No problem. But next time you'll handle it more carefully, and I'm going to help you clean it up, or this child's going to help clean it up. So this unconscious messaging that's what I've always appreciated about Montessori. I'm not saying that children feel disrespected if they're given plastic, but feel like, because that's also fine. But when it's this idea that, they're just a child, they can't handle it, then the messaging becomes very convoluted about your value and your worth and what you're capable of.
Yeah. And I gotta say, just I have the goosebumps a little bit, Jenny, because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because there's a depth to your understanding of Montessori and the materials, and just such a deep care in children and of children. So just you're talking about that with the guests and just the respect that you have for children, that they can deal with these. I like when you bring out the analogies with adults, because can you imagine if we had adults come over or some friends and we put away our expensive stuff because we were afraid they might steal it or something like that? It's just, there's a disrespect. And I think, it's the same what you're raising in the classroom, is that, again, children they can handle things and they can care for things, and they love beautiful things just as we love beautiful things.
Yes. Attractive. That's a word that's for all ages. What's attractive?
Yeah.
So I feel like this discrepancy in how we treat children versus other humans. I always think, what do we do when a child spills something? The tendency is like, oh, you're so clumsy. Oh, you're I knew I shouldn't have given you that. And I realized one day, what if you had company and you had your beautiful linen tablecloth out and everybody was there and all the adults, and they've got their glasses of red wine. And if one of your guests knocked over a glass of wine and is staining your grandmother's tablecloth, you're not going to start yelling at your guest and saying, oh, you're clumsy. I knew I shouldn't have given it to you. You're going to be going out of your way to, no, it's all right. We can take care of it. I'll get you some more. Why don't we treat our children more that way when they're the ones who are truly learning how to control their movements?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Are you familiar with Haim Ginott, Ginny?
I don't know that name, no.
So he's the mentor of the two women who wrote How to Talk So Kids Will Listen.
Oh, I used that word. I lived that book as a parent.
Yeah, so he basically talks about this, how we should be more mindful of treating children like we do our guests. So it reminds me of that. But yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, just one more thing about the materials that I wanted to put in, which goes back to spilling things and maybe breaking things or whatever. Montessori found that it was really important that not only was the child in charge of the learning experience, but they also benefited if the learning experience was self-correcting. Mm-hmm. No one had to come and tell them whether they got it right or not. Nobody had to check it off and say, you got the right answer. No one has to say, oh, you silly person, you're so clumsy. They get the messaging from the experience. And she called that control of error, and that we should be friendly with error. Error is our friend, she said, because that's how we learn the most. And boy, that's a totally 21st century rediscovery. You hear that a lot in the world.
Yeah.
We learn when we make mistakes. When we get it right, what are we learning? Nothing.
Yep.
So she really discovered that very early and designed all of these activities so that children can correct their own error. No one has to come and tell them you got the right answer to that multiplication problem. No one has to tell them, hold that more carefully, and then you won't drop it, and everything in between.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying. I've thought of this as when people think of independence, they think of maybe leaving the house. You've got your own place. You've got a job, but a lot of times I don't think of independence of mind. Like, I'm discovering this for myself versus somebody else just telling me and I write it down and forget it a few weeks later or something. So I find the same thing. It's almost like you're the guide helping them to understand it, but there's no other way, as you said in the beginning, to really know something if you have not worked with it with your own senses, with your own mind. So, and I'm curious about this. I know I don't want to get into kind of cultural elements and so forth, but it seems like, one of the biggest challenges adults are facing today is that you don't know what's true and what's not. And it's like, it seems to me like a lot of that is because we've just come to rely on what others say is true versus really digging deep and going to primary sources, looking for ourselves. Do you think there's a connection there with education and not being more of this kind of Montessori-like process and where we are today? Or what's your take on that? It's kind of
I'm laughing because absolutely.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's missing right now in that idea of what is truth and what is not true is the lack of critical thinking, of people being willing to, think about what they're hearing or they read or someone says and really kind of analyze it. Some things are quite obvious. Children explore them from a very young age. When a child is dropping a spoon from their high chair over and over again, they're not really being annoying. In some way, you could say they're exploring gravity. Mm-hmm. Every time I let go of this, it always falls in the same direction.
Yeah.
And so, there are some things we don't have to say or be critical thinkers about it. Gravity is gravity. You can believe it or not, but either way, it's the law. Yeah. And if you defy it, there will be a consequence. So children start out at that level of exploring reality and what is truth. And all of the activities, because the activities are so hands-on and sensory motor, leading, all the way up into the older ages, they don't have to rely on someone else to tell them whether this is true or not. Their own experience convinces them. And that's true for those multiplication facts as it is for, that the pink tower will be the same height no matter what order you put the blocks in. So that they begin to have a sense of truth without anybody preaching to them what's truth.
Yeah. And I know that Montessori put so much work and effort and experiment and other people around her at the time into these materials, even with the blocks, that they have a certain number of them. They're a certain height that child kind of inductively figured out. Do you think you can have, this is a contentious question, I get this, but can you have real Montessori without these Montessori materials?
Oh, that is such a good question, Jesse. I'll give my summary answer is, and I'd be happy to talk more about this, but I believe that Montessori is about essential principles. And you can apply those essential principles in any setting, any environment, with any age, from birth all the way up through, our oldest elders. Mm-hmm. You can have an environment with the most beautiful, pristine, highest grade Montessori materials and not have a Montessori environment because the principles are missing. So the principles, to me, have to come first. And understanding those principles, like what I was just saying, learning through your own activity, your own, being able to control your own error. But if you have the materials, which we can trust the materials because we have such a long period of development that's happened. If you have the materials and you're applying the principles, that is the ideal combination. So that's when you're talking about an educational environment. You want to have a Montessori environment. If you can have the materials and those kinds of activities, then you'll be getting the true potential of a Montessori environment. But if you don't have those principles at work, the materials will go nowhere. You'll just become a teacher with what I call really cool manipulatives. And I'll get to them. So
yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I find that sometimes I'll find teachers that we either trained in a way that was kind of like, well, this is what the materials are, but was never like, well, the why behind those materials, So they're just kind of repeating what they learned, but not without understanding them. So I can completely see what you're saying there. And then, I've met parents that are just incredible with their kids. They're going on trips. They're building things in their backyard. They're just doing so much hands-on stuff, but they don't know Montessori materials.
Yeah.
But they're doing a lot with their child or their children. But I think there does come to a point when, like, even the reading materials in Montessori, and maybe you could talk a little bit about reading materials, but the idea that, a child's just going to somehow naturally know how to read out of nowhere. Whereas in the Montessori classroom with certain materials, they can read at 3-4 years old and love it. But without those, that development, it might be a little bit more challenging to learn how to read.
Well, that's true because, but it's really, again, understanding what is necessary for a child to read. And we go back to indirect preparation. We go back to exposure to experiences that are matched to where exactly they are developmentally. So there's no point in trying to teach anyone to read if they don't know words, if they don't speak the language. They have to have a rich, wide-ranging vocabulary. because there's no point once reading is about decoding in an alphabetic language such as English, and you can decode it all day long, absolutely accurately, what these letters stand for. But if you don't know what that word means, you can't read it. Mm-hmm. So understanding the components of something like reading is, again, that's essential principles. That's understanding the best thing a parent can do with their child from birth is talk to them. Yeah. Talk to them in a real voice, not baby talk. Use real vocabulary. It doesn't matter how complex the vocabulary is. They don't know any of it anyway. But they are in a time of life where their brains are looking for language, where their bodies are looking for language. And so if you talk to your children, and then eventually they will magically, because it's much harder for us to learn a language, but little children are designed to learn a language. And they will begin to feed that language back. And then you can begin to have conversations. And now you could be naming things, and you can be talking about what you're doing as you're doing it and after you've done it. And, all of this language experience. What concerns me today is that children aren't around real language very much. Mm-hmm. Much of the language that's offered to children through the media is, not full language. It's kind of like baby talk. I'll just say that. I won't malign any TV programs. But but the other thing now, though, is how many times does a child hear one side of a conversation? Mm-hmm. They're hearing their parent on their cell phone, and they don't hear what the other person is saying. All they hear is what the adult with them is saying. That's one half of a conversation. You cannot really you cannot become acclimated to conversation if you don't hear both sides. So, all of this, this is all important if you want to talk about reading.
Yeah, and culture. That's for adults, Ginni, what you just said, one side of the conversation is problematic,
Yeah, and I had a teacher come to me once. She was saying, "Oh, children, I don't understand what's happening to children. Young children, they're, they walk, the 3-year-olds, they walk in and they're just walking around the room. They're just babble, talk, talk. They're not interested in doing anything else." And I said, "Well, what do you think they see on the street?" Yeah. Now we have people that are talking on a call, and you don't see even that they have their earbuds in. They're just walking down the street, probably gesturing, talking. Yeah. Now, just growing up, I will tell you what we would have thought of that person. Walking down the street, gesturing and talking.
Yeah.
And so children will adapt to the culture that they experience. Yeah. And so if we want to support them in fully adapting to human culture, we have to give them all the dimensions of that experience.
Yeah. Ginni, I wonder if you had this too, because I feel like that I was lucky where I had a family that we would have meals maybe once every 2 weeks, like a big, maybe 10 people or so. Mm-hmm. And man, everybody at the table had a different opinion. This was not like the family all agreed on things, political, religious, whatever. And I just find, at least for myself, and I've definitely seen this with other children, there's almost like a natural tendency for young children to want to be in those conversations, to listen to them. Whereas it seems that culturally we try to separate them from that. And and now, as you said, the conversation is usually just one-sided anyway. But I feel like we're not exposing them to that adult language as you're talking about, and that adult discussion. Obviously not completely inappropriate stuff. I mean, that would be crazy. But just the level of dialogue versus, as you're saying, the baby talk.
Exactly. And the thing is, they know, it's just like the beauty issue. They will intuit, they will intrinsically know that they're being kept out.
Yeah.
And that they're somehow less than important, less than human, less than valuable. I mean, when I was growing up, it was children should be seen and not heard. So it was actually explicitly said to us, you sit here, you don't talk, you don't contribute. But at least I was there to absorb the conversations.
Yeah.
But I think that giving them their opportunities to have their voice is incredibly important. And going back to your question about, what is truth and what is not, if you are brought into engagement, say with conversation, and you're given value as a contributor, as a participant in that, you're not waiting for someone else to tell you said the right thing, you didn't say the right thing. So there's that critical thinking being the foundation of it is, okay, I'm going to say this, and oh wow, I just insulted somebody.
Yeah.
And so then there's like, well, I don't really like hearing you say that to me. And it's like, oh, now I'm learning something.
Yeah.
So it's this ongoing, and that is human principles. Montessori just got to kind of isolate it, identify it, and name it. But that's human. That's being a human. That's becoming a part of human culture. And I think that's the other thing about Montessori principles. It's not some person's ideas that are then being imposed. It's somebody's mind discovering this is what humans do. This is how humans become literate. Let's see if we can support that. The famous story about, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it. I want to hear you talk, so go for it.
The famous story about how the sandpaper letters were created was that, Montessori was working, and it was in the slums of Rome. The parents were all illiterate. They saw amazing, amazing changes and positive developments in their children when Montessori started working with them. And so there was a delegation of mothers who came and said, okay, you've done such wonderful things for our children. Please teach them to read. Because these parents knew how important it would be for their children to have that ability to participate in society. And Montessori said, I can't do that. There's no way. They're too young. Reading is something that happens when you're older. And they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I love it. Montessori caved to their pressure. And she said, oh, okay, I'll figure something out. And she thought, well, they like to touch things. They're interested in sound. A letter is a shape. That's 3 senses. And so she invented the sandpaper letters. It's Italian. It's a completely phonetic language. She just showed them, this is how you trace it, which is how you would draw it. This is the sound that it goes with, and the child's eyes can see this is how it looks. And after about 6 months, children spontaneously started writing because they had all the tools they needed to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, even saying the tools they need, because they need something that aids them, and it takes a genius to kind of create something like that out of basically nothing. But and I wonder just the connection with that, with the respect, because Montessori, as you were noting, that with these materials, there is a sense where you show the child what to do, and then you step back.
Yes.
And I think there's so much in that, kind of getting into what you're speaking of with this respect, that you can work with this on your own. I don't need to be here all the time with you.
Absolutely. And, you can tell when a child comes into the environment for a new child, you can already identify the child who is already kind of tied to the adult opinion, the adult praise, the adult telling them it's right, because they are afraid to touch everything, and if you tell them really, you can do it as much as you want, they just sort of sit there. And then, of course, you've got to respond to that and say, well, let's see what else we could do with this. And you've got to, it's like priming the pump. Mm-hmm. And, but again, another child might be basically, you feel like, you've shown me, like, get out of my way. And so you have to be responding to that as the guide, as the adult, but you have to understand what it is that you're connecting the child to well enough to make those judgments. Intervene, not intervene, how much to intervene, when to get out of the way is really, really essential. And that's an essential principle of Montessori that you won't get if you just have an intellectual understanding of the material and, how to present it.
Yeah. So maybe on that note, just thinking about parents, I'm getting a lot of questions. Obviously, there's a lot more parents at home with their children right now because of what's been going on with COVID and so forth. But there's a question around, how do I work with these materials? What do I do? How do I know a little bit more about them? So can you give any suggestions on maybe parents even getting to understand the materials for themselves, not obviously turning their house into a Montessori classroom, but just to grow like we've grown as adults through these materials ourselves?
Oh, that is a little tough because you have to have access to the materials to understand them. in a sense. Like there's a limit to how far you can go just intellectually understanding the materials. And when we're actually, in a sense, we're experimenting with this right now because so much of the Montessori teacher training is being offered online, the same way that the children are getting online education. And we really don't know how that experience for the adults is if they don't get to feel the heft of the material and feel that texture or count those beads, manipulate the materials. So in real times, better times, not COVID times, one of the best things is when teachers offer a lot of opportunities for parents to just come in and play with the materials. And I deliberately use the word play. We haven't talked about play yet, but, my favorite kind of parent night was I would just lay out select materials from the various areas and the parents would just come in and I would just sort of be hanging around and I'd say, oh, see what go ahead. And that's called the binomial cube. See what you can discover with that. And then to gradually bring them in, they can't learn about it in one night, but that's really one of the best ways. And once you get a sense of how one material works, you can, as adults, we can then say, oh, well, if that's how that works, I can see how all these other similar materials probably work the same way. So it's like a key to how this idea of the hands-on manipulative sensory motor learning can work for young children. So that would be the ideal way. Montessori writes about the materials. A book like The Discovery of the Child, this is for the children under 6. She writes about the materials and how they function. I think that, we are intellectual beings, so you can learn a lot intellectually, but I don't think you can learn it completely without getting that hands-on experience yourselves. So I would hope that teachers are sharing, information that links them to that manipulative sensory motor and not just the intellectual goals of the materials.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think if your teachers out there, I know a lot of the classrooms now, it's not like they're inviting a bunch of parents into the classrooms these days, unfortunately. So there might be a way in which teachers, or if you're a parent, you could reach out to your teacher and say, hey, is there a way I could just borrow one material and just play with it at home? As you said, play with it. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be I'm going to work with this material and learn it, So maybe there's a potential there. And, jumping into what you said, Ginni, about the training, I remember taking the training and think at first I was like, do I really need to be working with so many materials? Because they have you working. I mean, Ginni, maybe you can describe a little bit of it, but for me, it's like you are working with materials. You're sitting there like a child for hours and hours, day after day, week after. It became amazing and fun, but my intellectual side was like, do I really need to do this? And then, at the end, I realized that's how you actually understand it fully, is through working with it. So,
well, I have 2 thoughts on that in particular. One is how many tasks that humans do can you learn intellectually? What if you were in cooking school? What if you were, studying carpentry? What if, so many things you have to actually do it. Someone can show you how to do it, but then you have to do it. So I think that's a related analogy. And how do I want to say this? When you're handling something, you can often not understand it intellectually, but only by handling it will you get it. I do have an example. My first year in the classroom, there's a material called the constructive triangles. I did not get them at all. I mean, I was just like, what is a child going to do with this? Why would a child be interested in this, right?
Yeah.
And, but fortunately, I had gotten a message in my own training that if you don't understand why you would present a material or why a child would be interested in it, just work with it yourself. Just, I use the word play. So I decided, spring break was coming, and I thought no children like constructive triangles in my environment. No surprise, because I didn't. So I just took them home with me, and I just said 30 minutes a day over spring break. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to get them all out and just see what happens. And of course, I spent more than 30 minutes because I would get excited. And by the end of that week, I knew so much about geometry and about how shapes are made from other shapes, things that I did not get from my own education.
Yeah.
And so this idea of just interacting with it, and I truly do, I use the words play and work interchangeably, because they are the same thing. When the true play and true work are the same thing. I sometimes think Maria Montessori observed what children do, and she honored it by giving it the word work.
Yeah.
And we've turned it into a command. You must work.
Yes.
But it's actually about play, is the open-ended exploration and see what I discover. And if the tools are designed, if the toys are designed well enough to allow that open-ended exploration, you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn something. Yeah. I always think Legos, the original Legos, are a perfect example of a Montessori style activity. And I observed my own children, all the amazing things that they would do with Legos. But when that started to change was when Legos started. You didn't get Legos. You used to just get a box of Legos. Now you get these Legos you can put together to make this car or this
exact thing. Yeah.
And it's like, then there's another message. You do what you're told. This has used these Legos to make this object, as opposed to, look at these. What can you do? What do you want to do with those?
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like there obviously there might be a time for that when you're you're 14, you're building some amazing big, like Starship. But I think, one thing I'm just very happy that you are raising this whole issue of work and play. And I think you're right that from my readings, it seems like Montessori really wanted to uplift children by saying they're not just fooling around like you think they just want to play all day. Like, this is work. But it ultimately, as you're saying, she had this view, and I think in her own life, and I see this in your work for sure, and I know for me, that it should be fun. Yes. Work should be fun.
Yes. We've lost that.
We have.
Work is a 4-letter word for too many people, and it's like, and children, even I learned with young children, sometimes, again, I couldn't use the word work because they had already absorbed, you mean like my parents' jobs? They hate going to work. They hate going to their jobs, and if I use the word work, they would be like, no, I don't want to do that. So you say play. Yeah. What do you want to play with this? See what happens.
Ginni, I just got an email from a parent who was like, she's so stressed. Should I go to Montessori? Should I keep my child in this very affluent private school where, it's very traditional, but it's private school? And she put at the end, and it just destroyed me when I read it. But she said, I'm just struggling. I don't know what to do. And at the end of the day, anyways, do I really want him just going the path of traditional this, traditional that, and then going to make money? And then I don't even like my job. And it's like, so it's an interesting situation where a lot of parents think, oh, Montessori's not going to work because they're not going to get exactly what I think of as success. But then when they really do some introspection, they don't even like the quote success that they've gotten from traditional school, Yeah. So it's a weird, culturally, I just think that concept of making work fun or making work enjoyable or thinking of work as play, that's huge. I mean, we all need that, not just children right now,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's whether it's, you want to talk about flow, that we should have this flow experience, whether it should be purposeful. There's lots of different ways to describe what would make our work meaningful. And I say it's the culture that has, damaged this, that has interrupted this idea of people enjoying by giving status to certain work over others, and that status is often in terms of how much money you would make. Well, that's not the child or the learners or the adults' problem. That's the problem of the whole society, of how we have assessed things and what kind of value we give to them. You go to this is classic. We used to say this all the time. Have a parent night. Ask, the parents, what's the number one thing you want for your child? They're always going to say, I want my child to be happy.
Yeah.
Some version of that. They're not going to say, I want my child to do really well on standardized tests.
That doesn't come out of their mouth.
No, in reality, because of the pressure that parents are under, They are actually saying that. I want my child to go on standardized tests. That's why I'm afraid to have them go into this alternative form. I want them to go through the standard type of education. So when they take that test at 3rd grade or 5th grade or to get into college, they will do the best. And the best is not based on what they are. It's based on what they know. I mean, I went to high school, pretty exclusive high school, and did very well because everything I was tested on was basically a test of my short-term memory skills. I could remember mathematical formulas long enough to do really well in the finals for that term, and I don't remember any of it. That's why I had to get the constructed triangles and bring them home so I could understand geometry.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Sorry about that.
No. I think that's perfect. And I think culturally, I mean, all of what we're talking about is not just children, it integrates with our larger world. So I think this is, perfect. And you mentioning, this idea of status or money as status, it's like, I think generally what we're getting at is people that are not judging what really makes me happy. Like what do I enjoy? Because whether you're a farmer with your own small farm and you're just doing that, or you're a huge farmer and you're making a lot of money, either way, you could be enjoying it or you could be hating it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we tend to kind of focus, particularly today, on money or just on, in the eyes of others, because forget about money. There's a lot of people that are, quote, famous on YouTube, but they're not making a lot of money,
Oh, yeah.
So it's something, and I think it actually maybe comes back to what you've talked about throughout, which is you just alone with the world. It's not what somebody else thinks about it. It's not somebody else telling you what to think about it, but what do you want?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And from your own experiences, you can begin to, I do think people have to have a sense of, morality and what's right. It's less because it makes me feel good. I don't want to go out and do that because it would harm other people.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's another path. And I think Montessori does an excellent job on that path for children. As you go into the second stage of development, ages 6 through 12, and they begin to have that sense of justice and fairness, and naturally they have that interest in that and that concern of it. And then they get experiences through which they can learn what are the consequences when I do this versus that. And even a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old begins to learn, well, if I throw the pink tower cubes across the room and they get chipped, no one else can use them.
Yeah.
I don't want to be responsible for that. They love it as much as I love it. I'm going to take care of all these materials so that everybody can enjoy them. That's a huge message that's just built again into the principles.
I agree. I mean, there is no life isolated from others.
No.
Like, and maybe Ginni, you can share about the materials and why there's only one of each with this idea of community or respect for others and so forth. I mean, what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. That's that people are often like, well, why is there only one? Like, we'll just leave it at that. So I believe my understanding is that they originally did have more than one of things, materials, but they didn't see the same outcomes for the children when there were multiples of the materials. And it wasn't about, in this case, it wasn't about learning, example, like, about the pink tower. It was learning what you're referring to, the social life. People think that children, particularly under 6, are really egocentric and they only think about themselves. I would love for people to let go of that thought, because it's not true. Young children are so other-oriented. That's the only way they can become part of our world. And they are very aware of others. They are very empathetic to others when they're given the opportunity. And what they discover with only one is this idea of sharing. Many people have an idea of sharing, like, if I'm using these blocks, I have to let this other person come and do them with me because I have to share. Mm-hmm. And really, the sharing in Montessori is much more profound. We share everything in this room. It doesn't belong to any one of us. And when it's available, I can use it, and I can use it for as long as I want, and no one can tell me to put it away. No one can say, you must let so-and-so use it now. Mm-hmm. It's, you have that full-on experience with it. But then when you are finished, You're not finished until it's back in its place, ready for the next person to use. And that is a level of social responsibility we could use a lot of in our world right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And I love, it's wild because when we think of materials, I think of one child maybe sitting with one material, but there's a part of the social even in that work as one individual. So
well, yes, for that child as an individual, but then the entire rest of the group has to honor.
Yep.
Oh, Jesse has that right now, so I can't take it. I can't take it from him. I can't try to intimidate you into putting it away. It's just like that would all be violating the social. Basically, it's the social contract that just is lived. We don't ever have to put the rules up and explain it to children. They just live and they absorb it.
And I love how you say they just live it, because it does. I mean, I can only say this and you can only say this so much, but like for parents to see it in the classroom is it happens organically.
Yes.
Like this isn't, because I don't know about you, Ginni, but when I was in school, we'd have these big lectures and the teachers would come out and say, you should be nice to your neighbors. And what happens in Montessori is we don't have to tell a child you need to be nice to your neighbor. They care about their neighbors because of the environment and what's in the environment. It happens organically.
Right. Yeah. And this is what Montessori discovered. If children's true needs are being met and they're being given this, this kind of appropriate levels of independence, they will naturally become good people. Yeah. And that is also not a popular analysis, at least in the Euro-American type culture. We come with this premise that people are bad, and we have to civilize them so they could be good. And Montessori discovered the exact opposite. When children are released to follow their own impulses with limits, these limits such as we're describing of how it affects others, they will rise to an amazing height of goodness.
Yeah, and empathy.
And empathy and compassion too,
Yep.
Understanding. And another way it shows is like sometimes a child might be having difficulty and no child will rush to help. And Montessori said, when that happens, observe the other children, because it means this child doesn't need help.
I know, exactly.
If the child needed help, the other children would perceive that and they would be rushing in.
Yes.
So it's this balance, and it goes right up with the, what is truth, what is not truth, what is critical thinking, what is true social responsibility. And again, right now, we are experiencing a huge lesson in what happens when sense of social responsibility is imperfect, is limited.
Yeah, I think for me, with Montessori, just the beautiful integration between the individual and the community that she created, and that teachers and guides, such as yourself, are doing in these communities, it's beautiful. And there's a Harry Sullivan. Do you know Harry Sullivan? He's late psychologist.
Oh no, maybe I don't recognize the name. Okay. No,
but he said, as one respects oneself, so one can respect others.
Yes. And
I think Montessori really had a sense of that. Like when you can calm within, you're able to be very calm, empathetic, and caring about others.
That is so true. Yeah. I agree. And I agree partly because, intuitively, I'd like that to be true, but I've seen it. I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen with these young children. And then I see what develops from it. And I have had the good fortune occasionally of getting to know someone who was in my environment as a 3, 4, or 5-year-old, and getting to know them as an older child or even as a young adult. And it's really exciting to see how that plays out then. And I've seen it in my own children, because for better or worse, they were raised as Montessori. And, I see the kind of human beings they are. I see what they consider important. I see the partnerships they make. I see how they're raising their own children. And it's very, very validating to have that ability to find evidence that you are on the right track.
Yeah.
And that's what Montessori provides. It's if you are applying those principles as they're intended, you will see the expected outcomes.
Yeah. No, I know I'm keeping you. Usually these are shorter, but I was like, oh man, I've got Ginni here, then I'm gonna get as much as possible. So I don't want to hold you on forever. So is anything kind of, wrapping up here that we've missed, or that you really want to get out to the world out there? Just throw it out there. Anything you want, really.
Well, Gosh, that's a hard one. There's so much. I think I do think that we were talking about critical thinking, but I think we also live in a very skeptical time, skeptical age, where people don't want to just believe what they're being told, but they also don't look for the evidence to understand it. But I think a really helpful thing is to find what I call Montessori allies. Like just who, because these are truths. This is not, like I said, the invention from someone's mind. These are realities of the human condition that are there for anyone to find in any setting if they ask the right questions, if they look the right way. And so I've always been excited to find Montessori allies, and they come in very strange forms. But I just would encourage, like you mentioned, this gentleman Sullivan. We recognize when people are moving in the same direction or getting the same ideas, and it's that in another way of validation, because it isn't saying, oh, it's just Montessori.
Yes.
If Montessori was naming or describing something that is there for anyone to discover, she called her book The Discovery of Childhood. She didn't invent childhood. She's discovering, she's describing, she's identifying, and then she's trying to provide the right environment to match what's already happening there. Yeah. And it's beyond culture. I mean, culture is very important. We have to be very culturally sensitive. We have to provide, the experiences for the children that are aligned to their cultures. Mm-hmm. But there's also an aspect of being human that precedes culture. And Montessori is also very alert to what are those. And that's why she was able to train people, in 1913, and they could go off to all those different parts of the world and provide what she had shown them and see it work in all of those different cultures.
Yeah, I love just the human element of it, that's what integrates and connects all of us. It doesn't matter where you're from, what race, what nationality, we're all humans at the end of the day.
Yes.
Didn't she she called it not the Montessori method, but the child's method, right?
Oh my gosh. Her first book, there was no Montessori in the title. There was no method in the title. Yeah. It was a very, very clear, I think it was in Italian, but, it's sort of like, oh, I can't remember it. I'm sorry. But anyway, she didn't call it the Montessori method. When it was translated and began to be spread into other languages and other cultures, those people renamed the book the Montessori method.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a really important psychological shift, because it put the energy on the wrong, put the attention on in the wrong place. She was talking about, this is a way of life. We could think of it.
Yeah.
Montessori. And I've heard people say they look forward to the day when this will be just so much a part of how education is organized. We won't even need the word Montessori.
Yeah. I think we'll have to talk another time, Ginni, about this, because I think we could go on for, even this podcast is called the Montessori Education Podcast, but when I started, I really, really questioned whether to use Montessori, because it's just, I know Montessori is at the foundation. I love it, but it's like, as what you're saying, this is really about raising and educating children and growing ourselves. It's not, it's tough. And I know you're a big part of the movement, the Montessori movement. And at the end of the day, it's like, what helps children? If it comes from this individual, that individual, what's for the betterment of children,
Yeah, I think the best gift that, we'll keep using the word because that's what we use, but best for adults to learn about Montessori is for them to see the world through a different lens, and to ask different questions, to try to evaluate their children's or the educational experiences through a different lens. Mm-hmm. And there's if it's right, it will be always validated. If it as right as in correct. If it's correct, if it's a correct interpretation, it will be validated. And of course, that's what we're seeing today with all of this amazing neuroscience where they could look at a brain of a living child and say what's going on. But all of that neuroscience just keeps coming back to very similar descriptions of what's going on to what Montessori saw by observing children from the outside. Yeah. So that's very validating, and we should never be afraid about some new discovery, somehow negating Montessori. She would have been right there with that. With that.
Yeah, as you said, the comfort with error that she had said. So yeah. But I love your lens point. I think that's a great way to end. It's just we all need to have a new lens every now and again. So thank you so much for coming on, Ginni. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well,
so
you're welcome. It's always fun. My children used to say, "Put the quarter in," and she'll never stop talking. So.
Well, I'm happy. This thing went long, but I'm like, I'm not stopping it. I want to hear what you got. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity, and take care and be well.
Yeah, thank you. And same to you.